Hello everyone and welcome to CodeCast by STL Tech Talk, where we are going to bring you the content you want and need. Instructional, informative, unique, and insightful commentary on programming and technology. Coming to you live from Robots to Roadhouses, my name is JJ Hammond, and I'm joined tonight by two coding experts. Up first, he is Director of Engineering at Upside, a startup that is building the next generation of investment management software tools. He is a startup veteran, team leader, and project manager with previous experience in the e-commerce, video game industry, industrial, process control, social networking, and educational software fields. Also, he is a frequent speaker at software development user groups and conferences. He's the organizer of St. Louis MongoDB Meetup, co-organizer of the St. Louis Docker Meetup, and volunteer teacher for Launch Code, the one, the only, Brad Urani. Say hello, Brad.
Hi. Welcome.
Hi. And
very nice introduction. I appreciate that. Thank you, JJ.
Well, you're an amazing person, and thank you for being on the show. It is our pleasure to have you, sir.
You're too nice.
However, this show would not be possible, and I mean this, without the coolest guy I know, striving to bring development knowledge to the masses, and has spent the last 20 years architecting and implementing highly scalable ASP.NET applications, our very own Gus Emery. Hello, Gus, and how are you? And are you ready for a fantastic show?
I'm always ready for a fantastic show. Brad, thanks for coming on. JJ, it's a pleasure as always. Let's get to it.
All right, great. And don't forget, everyone, you can follow us on Twitter, hashtag CodeCast, or at STL CodeCast. Also, you can find us on Facebook, STL Tech Talk, Google+, subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to us using iTunes, Stitcher, Windows Phone, TuneIn Radio, or listen directly from our site. And don't forget to go to our website, stltechtalk.com, where you can find our tech news, podcast, CodeCast, find out how you can advertise with us or hire us to consult you on your technological needs. And don't forget, you can interact with the show by sending us feedback to podcast@stltechtalk.com. And if you're watching us live, you can ask us questions via the chat room, and we will do our best to answer those questions in a timely manner. Special thank yous go out tonight from JJ to Nikolai, Adam, Joshua, Rad Developers, and JavaScript Digest. So without further ado, let's get the show kicked off with the first question to Brad. What got you into technology, sir?
You know, I had two very important things happen in about 1990. One was that I got a Macintosh LC2 with 4 megs of RAM, 80 meg hard drive for Christmas. It's a very nice gift from Santa Claus. The other was that my parents got divorced, which basically led to me spending most of my nights staying up till about 4 a.m., even on school nights, messing around with my computer. I actually had a career, was on a career path to become a rock and roll guitarist. You know, I got the computer and put down the guitar. So, you know, you could argue whether my life changed for better or worse, but, you know, things have worked out even though I'm not a heavy metal superstar.
Sure.
Yeah, and that was actually a really interesting time because it was the next year I got a modem for Christmas, and that was right about exactly the same time that affordable dial-up internet came, and I had my own phone line, right, for $19 a month, $14 for internet. I had other friends who had computers too, but they had PCs, and they already had modems, so they were doing BBSs, and I started right at the same time the internet started up and became affordable dial-up. So it was real fortuitous circumstances, perfect timing, and I ended up, you know, making my first web page when I was in, you know, 7th grade in 90 or 91, surprisingly, though, I didn't really learn to program on the computer. At the same time, I had some abortive attempts to try to learn C and AppleScript and stuff at the time, but I learned to program on my TI-82 calculator, sitting in math class mostly. I was making full, you know, in middle school and high school, I was making full graphical video games, solitaire games, and stuff like that on the calculator, which was tough because that's a real constrained memory device. You had 26 variables, 5 lists that could hold a maximum of 99 items, a few arrays, and no functions. It was all go-tos, and that was fun, and that led me to get into it in college, et cetera, and here I am. I also ran a business in high school. When I was 16, I started an e-commerce business, sold yo-yos online. It was called Cosmic Yo-Yos, and that was the early days before anyone was taking credit cards on the internet. So I had to accept checks in the mail, and I sent out yo-yos and sold I think 6,000 or 7,000 yo-yos, which was nice. And I took that to college with me before the yo-yo fad kind of died. I don't know if you remember, but yo-yos were real hot in 97, 98.
Sort of like 3 or 4 of them in the closet right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of my story.
That's hot. I mean, that is sizzling. That's a very unique story, and thank you very much for sharing that. First of all, do you remember like how people would be like, "No, dude, you need the 4 ball bearings," or they had the 3 ball bearings or the 2? See, I know what you're saying, man. I was there.
Well, the ball bearing is what revolutionized the sport of yo-yos. Before that, it was fixed axles, metal or wooden, and when they put a ball bearing in, all of a sudden there was a whole new world of tricks that you could do, and that's why. Right when I started a website, and I just made text descriptions of like 300 tricks, and it got really, really, really popular. And I've got a very entrepreneurial father, and he convinced me to turn it into a business, So I started this little e-commerce business, and it was good. It made some money, and it paid for me to travel around the world when I got older. So
it's even better.
You're still a rock star, right? At heart, like there's still some rock stardom there.
Oh, yo-yoing? Oh yeah, I can do some yo-yo tricks. I don't think I have the room here, otherwise I don't have a yo-yo with me. But yeah, maybe.
I'm not allowed to play with those kinds of things in the house because I'm notorious for breaking everything. So yeah, I'm not allowed to do that anymore.
Yeah, there are chips all over my mother's furniture, and she used to get mad at me, but now they're sort of like mementos. She looks on them fondly and cherishes the chips I put in the end tables and stuff like that. So.
Yeah. No, the wife pretty much is like, yeah, you break something again, I'm going to kill you. Let's not buy it. Understand what I'm saying? But no, that's really cool. So what got you started into actually converting over from the development on the calculator to other types of development? So what was your, other than the calculator, which by the way, that's like one of the most original origin stories ever. So you got a cool backstory already in this little theme we have going on here. But what got you into the next step? Like what was that next language or whatever that got you going?
When Netscape Navigator 2 for Macintosh came out in '97, that was the first one to support JavaScript. So I started writing JavaScript. So I'm 35. I've been writing JavaScript for 19 years. Right.
Wow.
I'm telling you, the matrix can't come fast enough. I want to be able to upload your knowledge into my brain.
Yeah. So that got me into it, and then I was a business major in college, but I took programming classes and I aced them, and I ended up tutoring for the classes that I was taking at the present time, to make some money, and then right out of college in Boulder, Colorado, I went to University of Colorado in Boulder, and right out of college, actually during and after college, I worked for a startup there in Boulder, which made educational software. It was a really neat product actually. It was this game in Java. It was basically it was to teach kids computer programming. So it had a little window where you could write Java code and you could execute it, and it made these robots fly around in 3D and shoot things and blow things up. And technically it was pretty tough because we had a full 3D rendering engine called Java 3D, and in the other window we had a Java interpreter, and that's a multi-threaded environment where you have to juggle deadlocks and race conditions back and forth. It was a commercial flop. I think we sold 2 copies. I think the company made $40 in revenue total or something like that. But that was a really neat project for a young guy like me, at 22 years old, coming out of school to get involved with. So that kind of set the stage, and I've been in startups on and off ever since.
Nice, nice. So you had to deal with some X and Y axis stuff going on there if you were dealing with 3D space, right?
X, Y, and Z.
Oh, that's what I meant. X, Y, and Z axis. If people that listen to this show already know, I will bring a level of earthiness to the show sometimes. Yeah, no, totally. X, Y, Z axis, all that stuff, and actually with the release, I think kind of brings me up to that material design a little bit with this last Google I/O, that kind of talking about how to implement more different axes inside of regular applications that you wouldn't normally have thought of before. So using Java and stuff like that. So that's pretty hot. It's very cool stuff, and getting kids start on that from the very get is extremely important. So it was cool. So a lot of these stories that we hear are about how I learned on a very basic thing. Like, sometimes I run into people, and sometimes you run into people who are just, really kind of foo-foo and uppity or whatever, and they're like, oh, I started programming on, Mac or whatever. Sometimes I'm like, I wonder if it'd be better just to, like, completely send you into, like, using light switches, like how they do on launch code sometimes, and just show them, here's the you need to understand from the electricity to the ones and zeros to all the layers so that you can really understand this in its entirety, as opposed to like coming in from a higher level, right? I mean, I don't know, call me crazy, but I think that's a better approach.
So it's very interesting that you brought that up, because that was one of the fundamental big questions we had when we started teaching at LaunchCode. So for those of you who don't know, LaunchCode is LaunchCode's a program we have in St. Louis. It was founded by a gentleman named Jim McKelvey, who co-founded Square, the little credit card reader thing. His co-founder was Jack Dorsey, who's now a billionaire because of Twitter. Both St. Louisans, by the way. Jack doesn't spend much time here, but Jim does. And he started this LaunchCode with this idea: we're going to take people who know how to program but don't have jobs yet because they don't have the right resumes, and we're going to put them in pair positions at companies, here in town, and get them their first jobs, right? They start fixed rate, $15 an hour, with the idea that once they come up to speed, they convert full time. I volunteered earlier to help with this effort, and we did the first round of interviews. Our goal was to place 100 people in new jobs. I helped interview the first 120 of them. We placed about 60 of those, and we sort of ran out of really good candidates. So LaunchCode had to evolve. And we had a question there, like, what kind of stuff do we teach? Do we teach frameworks? Do we teach logic? How low level do we get? And I volunteered again to teach a class. I taught a 10-week C# class. It was MVC, .NET MVC, and I spent most of the time teaching the framework and how to make a functioning web application. And it was very successful. Of the 15 people that signed up, 6 graduated, and I think 5 of those got their first jobs. But Jim thought that we should be teaching computer science, right? And after that, he sponsored, in conjunction with LaunchCode and Harvard CS50 Online, which is a free online course. He got a lot of press for that, and 1,000 people signed up to take Harvard CS50. It was so big, in fact, that he had to, in a last-minute emergency, he had to convince a friend of his to give us the St. Louis Opera House to host the first meeting, which is a real neat moment. But that's real different, because Harvard CS50 is a tough course, and it starts with binary math. It starts with very, very low-level stuff. And I think, having seen the results of that, I think that the CS way was the way to go. When I taught mostly the framework, the MVC framework, and at the end of it, all the students did have functioning web apps, and there's something to say for that. But I feel like the people who took CS50, because they had to start at the basics, ended up being more well-rounded candidates, etc. And CS50 is taught in C, right? And even if the candidates never program a line of C again, it turns out, I think, that it's easier to learn a new language and framework than it is just to, in general, learn how to program, right?
And conceptualize what it looks like from start to finish. Like, I want to do X. Well, there's a lot involved in thinking about how to do X, and then there's a lot involved in thinking about, well, what happens to the end result, and then what happens after that, and what my loop is, or whatever the application life cycle needs to be. It makes you think about from the ground up, like even designing it from the base. So that's awesome and really fundamental stuff. And I'm taking LaunchCode, so if anybody wants to ask me how my experience is offline, hit me up on Twitter, Facebook, whatever the case may be. I'll definitely tell you about it. So Gus, you have a question. Let's get you.
Well, I heard you mention .NET. What language did you start with when you started building websites after your entrepreneurship in college?
Well, my first job wasn't websites. It was building that video game, educational video game in Java. I guess my first web-based job was with ASP Web Forms, C#, which was right when I had done a little bit of ASP Classic, I guess, as far as little projects here and there. But my first job was doing ASP Web Forms, and that was right. I'm trying to think of what year that was. Maybe 90 or 2003. Okay. I think. Right. And then I became a full-time Microsoft developer. I transitioned into a company called Cat5 Commerce, which is here in Chesterfield, which is a suburb of St. Louis. really, really neat company, small company, quick-growing e-commerce company, and we had a really dynamite .NET team. And so I'm a big fan of the .NET platform and MVC, and then I've switched to startup land from a small business back to startup land, and I've gone with completely open source technologies, which was a big change.
Oh,
Okay.
yes.
So what was it like to transition from .NET to the open source platform, and what languages are you using now?
So it's quite a shock. I'm still honestly trying to catch up and learn all these things, right? Since I left .NET, which was only about a year ago, I've worked at 2 different startups, including the one I'm at now, and it's more than just Ruby on Rails versus .NET MVC, because I had to kind of pick up a new operating system in Linux, new IDE, 2 new databases, MongoDB and MySQL. Now I'm learning EmberJS on the front end. Various system tools, Docker and stuff like that. So it's the last year I've pretty much had my nose buried in a lot of code books. New source control system, right? You have to learn Git and other things, RabbitMQ and other things. So I haven't done much socializing or my hobbies trying to do that, but that's rewarding. Fundamentally all these tools are great tools. There's so many good languages and frameworks out there that I don't think there are any really bad choices these days. I've got my preferences, as I'm sure you do, and the fundamentals are all kind of the same. But anyone who tells you, oh, a good programmer can turn around and learn a new language over a weekend, not quite true. You might learn the basics, but to really be comfortable with the framework and stuff, it takes a long time. So it took me a long time.
Yeah, if you use drugs, maybe, you clone yourself. So if you figure out how to use drugs and clone yourself at the same time,
exactly.
But it does. I think it does make you a more well-rounded developer to see different paradigms, different types of frameworks, different types of languages. C# being strongly typed, is way different from something like PHP or Ruby, which is dynamically and weakly typed. There's totally different styles, different design patterns, and everything, and
right.
And you always learn one thing from the other. That what you learn goes back and forth. So even the stuff I learned from dynamic languages is stuff that's applicable to strongly typed languages, and vice versa. So it makes you better rounded.
Cool. So can you just describe what MongoDB is? Because I think a lot of people have heard about MySQL, but what's MongoDB?
So MongoDB is a quote-unquote NoSQL database, which is really an unfortunate term that has kind of stuck. Because it doesn't mean NoSQL, it means not only SQL, like MongoDB in addition to SQL, right? Mm-hmm. It's a database that is not a relational database. So you're all familiar. If you're familiar with SQL, you know that you have tables with relationships to each other. MongoDB stores JSON, and if you think of JSON is nested, right? You've got a JSON object with different levels of nesting. It has arrays in it, potentially arrays of more nested JSON, right? So one giant block of JSON is a single record, and in one shot you pull all that back, right? So it's fundamentally denormalized, right? Whereas in a SQL database, you're really worried about how you store it so that you're in first normal form and that you don't have data repeated in any, stored in more than one table, right? Yeah. Sure, MongoDB sort of does away with that, right? And says, store the data as it's displayed, even if it's no longer normalized data, right? And what you get when you do that is, for one thing, a much, much, much faster database, but also other really, really neat things. Like, for instance, MongoDB does not support joins, right? But if you store your data in a way where you only have to fetch one record to show one page, then you don't really need them. It also doesn't support transactions, but that's a trade-off you get for having something that's really high speed, really high scale. I organized the St. Louis MongoDB group, and if you're interested, you should check it out. But we just had a gentleman speak. His name is Jay Hirsch, and he's the head systems guy for Carfax. Carfax is currently serving 12 billion records off of MongoDB, and he told some amazing stories like, we want to move a server from one data center to the other. We unplug it, we put it on a truck, we drive it across the country, we plug it back in, and it automatically syncs and catches back up again. Yep. Really neat things like that you'd be hard pressed to repeat in SQL. Yeah.
But what you said is the one trade-off that you have is no transaction, right? So you're kind of throwing your right at a wall and hoping it sticks, right?
Yeah, and it's not a tool for everything, right?
Exactly.
You know, as anything, all of a sudden it's a choice. So, for instance, you know, here at Upside, we deal with financial data. With financial data, that the referential integrity, right, the foreign key constraints, the transactions, that's real critical when you're dealing with, you know, people's retirement accounts and stuff like that. So our app is powered off MySQL. But at the same time, we collect a lot of analytics for our marketing efforts, you know, clicks and ad clicks and A/B testing, and it's much easier just to dump that into MongoDB than it is to normalize it and store it in relational tables, because the ETL would be so much work.
Yeah, well, it sounds like this is kind of going back to the early 2000s or late 90s, reporting databases, right? So they're fairly flat. They're larger, everything repeats, but they're very fast scale, right? So it'd be for read-only data for the most part, correct?
Yeah. The difference is, if you're talking about like OLAP and like SSAS, right?
Yep.
The difference there is that the schema is completely predefined in an OLAP,
true.
right? It's very rigid, and when you get the data, if the data is slightly dirty, you've got to do a lot of work to get that data in shape to put it in a cube. With MongoDB, right, you don't define the schema. You don't even have to define a database. You put up the server, you start writing to it, and it'll save whatever you throw at it. So when you start adding new fields and stuff like that, it just takes them without any pre-warning, right? So with that flexibility, it saves you a lot of that ETL work, you know? Yeah. So it's pretty different from that too. And to be honest, like those reporting databases, at least, I mean, I think they're probably pretty big, or I guess you probably know better than I do, but I think they're probably big in the you know, larger companies and stuff, but they're almost, no one's really using them anymore in, you know, quote unquote web scale companies. They've switched kind of Hadoop and NoSQL databases and things like that.
Cubes, you know, all the different types of reporting engines, like you said. Yeah, exactly. I was just trying to bring a referential integrity for some people that haven't used this, you know, to actually get them to understand kind of what it was like. But you're right, there isn't a table definition or anything like that. But it's very fast for regurgitating data that's fairly static. And as you're saying, anything that you need that's better, go to something that's transactional based, like SQL, Oracle, MySQL, Postgres, I believe is as well, things like that. Anyway, we'll get off of that.
That was some sexy talk, guys. Some dev somewhere is like, yeah.
I hope so. But Brad, didn't you have something you wanted to show us tonight?
Yeah, so I was going to show you a little bit of Ruby on Rails.
Brad, while you're pulling that up, I just wanted to give a quick plug again to Unidev. They sent us a great guest for our last night episode of STL Tech Talk podcast. That's another podcast that we do. We suggest everybody go listen to that as well. It's just, you know, fun and lively commentary about tech news and about local success stories and about the local tech scene. And this just happens to be a local tech company that reaches out to all over the world, but we just want to say thanks again, Andrea, for coming on the show, and again, that was from Unidev, so thank you so much. Brad, take it away, sir.
Yeah, so Ruby on Rails is an MVC web framework, right? It wasn't the first MVC framework, you know. I think some of the Java frameworks like Spring got there earlier, but it's the one that really captured a lot of people's imagination. It's sort of the template for what Microsoft built with .NET MVC. They borrowed a lot of concepts from Ruby, and to be fair to them, some of the things they actually did better, and some not so much. But if you've ever used an MVC web framework, the Rails paradigm will seem familiar to you, right? So, for instance, you know, you start off, it's got routes. So this is our route file, which defines the URLs and the controllers that they point to, right? You've got your basic controllers, which might look like this. You've got your action methods. Here I'm passing off the params, you know, which are my query string params and my form params, to a service, right? The views, if you've ever used any sort of MVC framework, will probably look pretty familiar to you. Let me just pull one up here. So you've got your HTML. Oh, this is an Ember view. Let me pick a better one here. This one. So you've got your HTML mixed in. You've got partial views, right, which are a staple of most MVC frameworks. You've got some dynamic code within these little tags here. It looks like the old ASP tags. I'm not sure which one came first, right? So it's a so from that end, you know, if you're familiar with MVC, Rails will be quite familiar. But Ruby on Rails does some neat things that are tough to do in other languages. Really, if you're coming from Spring or .NET MVC, the things that'll surprise you most are the fact that Ruby is weakly typed, right? Let me show you a model real quickly, and I think it'll make a little more sense what I'm talking about. So that's not the one I want. So here's a model, right, that corresponds to a database table called portfolio selection, right? There are no fields on here, even though there are fields in the database. Because Ruby is dynamic, you can do things like call portfolio selection.id, right, and it will return something despite the fact that you have not created a method or a field or property, if you want, called ID. Being a weakly typed language, it allows you to do a lot of really neat metaprogramming tricks, right? So this one here defines a relationship to another table, right? Another table called portfolio. It belongs to portfolio. Here's portfolio, right, which has many portfolio selections, which was the one I was just on. Hey, look, I'm misspelling. Right there, I've defined a relationship in code that matches the relationship in my database. What's really neat is that that's all you have to do to set up a model in Ruby on Rails. In another language such as C# or Java, you would have to have the framework generate a lot of boilerplate code for you, right? Generated code. In Ruby, you don't really need that because you have the power to dynamically call methods that haven't necessarily been defined. For instance, right here, this hasMany. What this is a method call in the middle of a class. HasMany is a method that I'm calling in the base class, active record base. This is a symbol, right, which is kind of like a constant, kind of like a string. It's a very memory-efficient sort of constant that you have in Ruby. What you're doing here when you do this is calling the method from the base class, passing it this, and it is at runtime adding methods to this class portfolio, right? So they're not defined because it's not a compiled language, it's an interpreted language. You can define the class at runtime, right, which is something you can't do in a compiled language. So if I actually pull up, and I'm going to pull up a command line here, and I'm going to go into my Rails console.
This is gorgeous, by the way.
Yeah. Oh boy. That might have sort of frozen. Hold on.
So the efficiency. So I'm kind of learning, like, because I don't know too much about Ruby, but this is very, very interesting. It's definitely worth me taking more time out to learn more about it. That's for sure.
So here's another neat feature of Ruby is that you can load the whole application as a command line application, completely disconnected from the web. So here I've pulled up the Rails console, right, and it's actually loaded all those classes into memory. So the one I was messing with was portfolio, right? So I can do portfolio.all.each, and this is sort of like a lambda expression that I'm typing in here. P puts P, right? And poor tofu, another misspelling, same misspelling.
That is me all day long.
Yeah, as it happens, that table's empty. Let me try another one. User.all.each. U puts U blank. Right? And so there's a spit out of all the users in the database. Right? So a couple interesting things going on here. For one, if I do like, so if I do users.first.id, right, I never actually had to define the method there. It just knew to, right, because you can see the class definition does not have a property ID here. Ruby allows this kind of neat metaprogramming where things get kind of built on the fly, right, and because you don't have those restrictions of a compiled language, right. And as I said, this hasMany, like these things are actually adding methods at runtime to this class, right? So let me show you something else cool. And then I'll mention this command line tool is another nifty thing that Ruby has that a lot of other frameworks that I've used do not. It has very powerful command line tools where you can interact with your application without using web browser at all, right? And so I think I just gave you a pretty good example of that. Another thing I love about Ruby on Rails that I think is maybe it's not unique, but I think Ruby does it the best, is managing database migrations. The ability to do data migrations is built right into the framework. So somewhere down here, I've got a folder. This is RubyMine, by the way, which is a very powerful IDE from JetBrains, who are the same guys who gave you ReSharper if you're from the .NET world. So one of the tough things that I've always found with web applications, or just applications in general, is that when you deploy an update to your application, right, a lot of times you have to change the database schema, adding new tables, adding new columns, migrating data from one column to the next. Ruby's got a very elegant, Ruby on Rails I should say, has a very elegant solution to that, which are these migrations, right? So you can see I've got a file, create portfolio selection table. So that's a new table that I'm creating in the database. So here I call a method, create table. I pass it the symbol, right, which is going to tell it what to name the table. And then right here I've got a block, right? So what this does is it creates a table, it adds an index to that table, and it adds a foreign key constraint to that table, right? And I'll run that in a second, I'll show you, but I want to talk to you about a neat bit of Ruby syntax first, which is this block, right? So a block here between do and end is actually an anonymous function, right? So it's analogous to like a lambda in C#, right? Or just a plain anonymous function in JavaScript, right? So I'm basically passing this, I'm passing to this method two parameters. One is the symbol and one is this function here, right? And what I get, this function has one parameter t, and this is a table builder that allows me to call these methods. So this is another method called t.references portfolio. That tells it, okay, you need to make a foreign key to the portfolio table, right? This says create a new field on that database table that's an integer type called score that is non-nullable, right? So using this kind of neat Ruby-esque syntax, right, where you have a block and then you've got this, then you've got these function calls inside a block. We've got this real powerful way to build tables in our database, right? And that's kind of a neat bit of like, that's very idiomatic Ruby, right, to use neat syntax like that, which is, I mean, you could do something like that in C# by passing in a lambda and other tricks, but it's not very commonly done. Ruby is designed to make stuff like that real easy. So here's another database migration, right? This one adds a column, right, to a table, and you can see there's an up and a down. The down is to reverse the migration, to take it away again, in case you mess things up or you want to practice your migrations, right? Here's another one that creates a number of tables, right? And this is kind of neat. When I'm ready to actually migrate my database, all it takes is a simple command line, right? I do rake db. I don't know where I am if I've run this or not. Rake db migrate. All right, so I've already run all those. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll it back and run them again. Rake db roll back step equal 3 migrations. So right, it dropped all the tables and the new columns I added. Rake db migrate, and it adds them all back again, right? So I'm actually, I've got all my, so I've got all these neat database migrations defined in code, which is real nice because for one thing, they all end up in your source control, which is real nice. You don't have to worry about losing all your SQL scripts and maintaining separate SQL scripts. And also when you go to deploy this, right, a lot of these platform as a service providers, like we use one called Heroku, which is real easy. You use Git to do a Git push your code and it automatically deploys it live to the web. It will automatically run these migrations when I deploy it. Which kind of makes for these like neat, foolproof migrations. So that's one of the things I think Ruby on Rails does real well. And I can show off a little bit of the testing frameworks that go in here too, because that's another place where I think Ruby on Rails shines. Right, our unit and integration tests.
I want to see it. I want to see it. I want to see it. I want to see it.
Yeah. So Ruby comes with this great. Well, actually, it comes with a gem, right? And let me talk about gems real fast. A gem is basically a module of code that you can download from the internet and include in your application. And it's analogous to NuGet in the .NET world. In fact, well, you could kind of say that Microsoft copied it from Ruby. That wouldn't be mean. Oh no,
it's fine. It's fine.
Although I said Microsoft took a lot from Ruby on Rails, but in some places they did do a better job. I'll give them that. So here's a gem file, right, which says these are all the gems I want in my application, and you can visit rubygems.org, right, and you can find any new gems you want. So let's see, I need a gem that does SMS messages. Let's see if I can find one. Ah, look, there are a number. I need one that interfaces with Google Maps. Ha, there are number ones, and you just include them, right? You add them to your gem file, you run a command called bundle install, and whoosh, you get all this stuff from the open source community, all these wonderful, wonderful pieces of code that people have contributed, sucked right into your application.
That's sick.
Yeah, that's one place where I think no other web technology has caught up. I think the Node.js community is coming close. They've got a similar technology called NPM, and they've got a lot of really, really neat packages, you know, but Ruby gems are really, really neat. And what I was getting at, the reason I got sidetracked on gems is I was going to show you the gem that we use to do unit and integration tests for our test-driven development. It's called our spec, right? And let me show you a spec, right? So, coefficient engine spec. All right, so here's one that tests a whole bunch of financial math, right? You kind of give it a context. You know, if within this end block here, that's a single test, right? Here's the engine I'm calling, right, with the params. I get the answer back, which is a hash, which is sort of like a dictionary, and I check to see that the answers are what I was hoping they are. Very, very slick, right? So it's got a nice little easy to use syntax for writing tests. Mm-hmm. All you do to run it is type rspec, and it's going to run all these, which is pretty slick. Whoa, massive blow up. I think that has to do with my. I was working on this right before I came in here. Anyway, trust me, these tests are actually supposed to run. But another really neat thing, right, is that we do two kinds of testing at Upside, right? One is unit testing and one is integration testing. And the way we define the two is follows. For a unit test, we basically test one function and one function only, maybe with a little wiggle room in there, right? But we test one function at a time. And that's what this does, right? This create expected value coefficient is what we're testing. Here's the output that we're testing against. The other thing we do our integration tests, and those basically start at the controller, go all the way down to the database, an actual database, pluck actual data, return the results, and then we do assertions to see if the result is what we expected it to, right? One of the things you have to deal with when you run integration tests like this, which Ruby on Rails makes so nice, is you can't have your tests like, your tests have to be idempotent, right? Which is a fancy way of saying, if I run a test once and I run it again immediately after, I have to have the same result. Well, think of like if you have a user sign up, right? If you sign the user up, they're signed in, that data's in the database. If you sign in again, you're going to get, hey, email's already in use, right? So you've broken the rule there, which means when you run integration tests, you have to start with a blank database. And for every test, you have to insert just the data you need. So you run the test, it succeeds, and then you wipe out the database before the next test, right? So let me show you how we accomplish that. So up here we have an integration test. Well, let me show you a better one. Yeah, I don't like that one so much. All right, so up here we have one. It's for this plan suggestion controller. It's something on a website that suggests how much money you should save for retirement and whatnot. So here's an integration test, right? It starts here. You've got the description. Here's a get, which simulates an HTTP get, right? Here are the query string params I've passed in, and here are the results I got back, right? Which is a JSON response, because this is an AJAX controller that I'm testing, right? So that's the integration test, and it hits the database, right? To run this test, I have to seed the database, and that's right here, create Upside organization, right? What that is a factory that seeds data for my unit tests, and it comes from this really great gem, once again, community-supported open source gem called Factory Girl, that allows me to like do a really neat syntax, a neat way for defining test data that I insert in the database for my test. And so the factories look like this. So for plan suggestions, so this is calling Upside organization, right? So that would be in organization factories. So you've got these factories like this one, each of which create a single record, and then after they're created, they cascade and create even more records, right? So, and this is typical like Ruby syntax. It's similar to the similar Ruby syntax to what I showed you in the database migration, where we have, this is a method call, right? Factory is the name of a method I'm calling. I'm passing it a symbol which tells it that's how it's referenced from the thing that's calling this, right? But I'm calling this method factory, defining it, called Upside organization. And here's a block again, which is once again an anonymous function, right? So similar to like a C# lambda. And then here again, I'm calling, this is a method call. Name is actually a method, and I'm calling it and passing it a single parameter, a string here, right? So this is another example of a Ruby DSL, or a domain-specific language. We're using Ruby's like dynamic syntax and really neat support for blocks. You can create very powerful domain-specific languages like this with ease in a way that's a little bit tougher, not quite as clean in a more strongly typed language or in a compiled language. Right? So these are the factories that create the data for my integration tests, and that's really, really neat. I can run a whole suite of these, test every page on my site. Every test inserts just the data I want in the database that it needs to pass the test, gets the answer back, and tests to make sure that we got it correct. So that's pretty nifty. And I'll show you one more thing, which is how we integrated this with our CI server. Right? I'm gonna just check out a branch here that I know is actually working, so I can show you these tests running. Right?
That's a pretty nifty gem there.
Oh yeah, definitely. Git stash. Got master. Right, so here's what the tests look like when they run. Oh my god. So bundle install is what installs the I'm missing some gems because I went back a version, some that I deleted. I'm on an older branch now. This is going to go out to the internet, download the gems I'm missing if I'm lucky. Come on. Maybe. Well, I might not. I may be out of luck today. But anyway, one of the neat things is that we have this set up. We use a lot of really neat third-party tools that one of them is GitHub, and I saw that you had a previous podcast about GitHub. We love GitHub. We're huge fans and of Git in general. In fact, Gus, you asked me about moving from .NET to open source, and if I can recommend just one thing, you may love or hate Ruby on Rails. You may be up in the air about Linux. The one technology that I absolutely love is Git, that I would never ever go back on. It is just blows my mind how much better it is than all the other solutions out there. I love Git. But yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, I totally agree with you on that. The only downfall for Git, and I've used Git for a couple of years, and Git is now available in the TFS 2013 and with Visual Studio Online, by the way. Yeah. Client-based, right? So you can put Git repositories up there and do everything that you can do now. The only downfall is if you have a developer that doesn't think the way that Git works, and they're only used to standard source code control, then you may have some issues.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The learning curve is steep, that's for sure. So this is Circle CI, by the way. So when we push our code to GitHub, it automatically kicks off a build. I'll show you our GitHub. Let me just go to a commit here. Actually, let me go to a pull request. So one of my coworkers here pushed this code, right, and it immediately kicked off a build, right, on Circle CI, which is a SaaS-based, web-based continuous integration server that runs the tests. I can click over here. I can see the results of my output, right, and this shows the output from our spec of the tests that ran. You can see a bunch of exceptions were thrown, which is why the build failed. I shouldn't say build because it's interpreted, but yeah, mixed in with all these. There we go. There's some good test output. Right, so there's the test output from our spec, from our integration tests and our unit tests. Scrolling down here, we also use Jasmine, which is a testing framework for JavaScript. So if I scroll down past all this, here's the output for our Jasmine, which are our JavaScript unit tests, which also ran. And you can see 119 specs, 0 failures. And we actually have this set up, so when I push to Circle CI, it also automatically pushes live to our staging servers, which are hosted on Heroku. So our systems are set up with using Git as sort of the glue to push from our local machines to our CI, up to GitHub, to our CI, and to actually deploy. And that system works real nice. And all these services are like, $19 a month. Our monthly bill for this stuff is like, $200 for like these 4 different awesome services we use, which is really, really nice. And all these things actually ping our chat room, which is our team chat room. So here you can see all the output from our GitHub goes to our team chat room. All the output from Heroku, which is where we host our site, goes there. Everything from Pivotal, which is our project management, pings our chat room. So that's a real neat integration too that helps our team do all this test-driven development. So I've kind of covered a lot of things there. Do you want me to? Is there anything that I missed on Ruby and Rails that you wanted to see? Any more questions about that, or about unit testing with RSpec, or about any of this our team setup here?
No, I just wanted to cover what tools are you using then? Just cover the tools that you're using so our users can have it in one shot.
Yeah, so obviously Ruby on Rails is the primary tool. We're using RSpec for our test framework. I'm going to switch back to the video.
Yep.
Here. That's hi, I'm back. All right, Ruby on Rails obviously. RSpec is our testing framework. Jasmine is our testing framework for JavaScript. EmberJS is the JavaScript framework we use for single-page apps. Git for our source control, CircleCI for our continuous integration, Heroku for our PaaS, our platform as a service that we host on, MySQL and Mongo database, and soon to introduce Docker, which is a Linux container engine, which is sort of a really neat, like a lightweight virtual machine kind of thing that's taking the Linux world by storm. It's a systems tool.
Yeah, I heard of that. Yeah.
Cool. So, Brad, tell me, what do you do away from the keyboard? I mean, you said that you've been working in this for quite a while here, but what do you do outside of the coding room?
You know, I used to have a lot of hobbies. Since I've been sucked into startup land, I haven't had quite as much time. I also have a 4-month-old baby daughter, which is also
congratulations.
Thank you. Which is also taking up a lot of my time recently. But I'm an avid skier. I play chess and poker. I used to be a scuba diver and world traveler. I'm into Shakespeare and Beethoven. I run on and off, occasionally. So I go for like 6 months hardcore running, and then 6 months I won't do it at all. So when I feel like it. And then
that would be winter and summer, right?
Yeah. Then we've got some. I work here at T-Rex, which is Upside is located in T-Rex, which is a startup incubator in downtown St. Louis, and we have some wicked table tennis matches around the office too that keep us give us an excuse to take a break during the workday.
That's awesome. Well, next time I'm down in St. Louis, I'll have to swing in and check that space out and see what it looks like. Definitely.
Yeah, you should. It's really fantastic. St. Louis has an incredible startup scene, a shockingly good startup scene. T-Rex is a building, right? It's 8 floors, and there are 87 technology startups in one building.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, most of them software, a few biotech companies that I don't understand at all, and it's a really neat environment. And right here, it's neat because you've got the companies in here, and there are also the groups that fund them. There's a great program called Arch Grants that donates $50,000 in non-dilutive capital to 20 startups every year. There's a program called Capital Innovators that does $50,000 to another 20 companies. All 40 of those companies every year move into this building. There's a venture capital firm called Cultivation Capital that does the second round of financing. They just in the $100,000 to $250,000 range. Finances these companies moving on, and they're right in the building. Of course, they've got the top floor with the window overlooking.
Oh, sure. Right.
Of course.
Yeah. And there are other neat organizations too. I-10, which is a mentoring organization for IT startups. So we've got this fantastic microcosm of startup land here in St. Louis. Really, outside of Chicago is probably the best thing between New York and San Francisco. It's really neat, and it's really neat to be a part of.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So, where can people find more out about you? On where are you most active at? I mean, I know, but I want you to tell our listeners.
So you can find me on Twitter at Brad Urani. I think it's down. There it is, right there. And I've got a blog at fractalbanana.com. You can hit me up on Google Plus, I guess, or LinkedIn, LinkedIn. Mostly Twitter, probably. Hit me up on Twitter.
Perfect. So, Brad, we always ask our guests a question at the end of the show. What technology do you see, or how do you see technology changing in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think at least in the sphere I'm in web, there's definitely a move towards functional languages, and that is something that I've just started to learn about recently. I just took a great course on Coursera called Principles of Functional Programming in Scala, which was taught by Martin Odersky, who's the creator of Scala. And, that class represents the entirety of my exposure to the concept, but I already love it. It's really, really neat paradigm. It's sort of post-OO, the way languages are moving. Actually, the biggest shame of all is that F# hasn't gotten more traction, because that's one of the best examples of a functional programming language. F#, Scala, Clojure, Maybe Haskell, that's kind of going to the functional extreme, maybe a little too much. But functional languages are picking up. You see companies like Groupon and LinkedIn are writing their Android apps in Scala because it compiles to the JVM. Companies like Twitter have started to write their back end in Scala. So I think that trend's going to continue. And on the web front end, things are moving so fast, I can barely keep up. All these great frameworks. Angular has just picked up so much momentum. I mean, it was popular 4 months ago, but my God, since then, it's like half of the talks at every conference about Angular, and if you all of a sudden, if you know it, your salary is worth 30 grand more. You know what I mean? And it's just not that. It's Ember, which we use, and I'd love to talk about maybe on another show.
No, for sure. You're coming back, sir, to talk about like 5 things we didn't get to tonight.
Facebook's Polymer framework is another phenomenal one, and then really neat things are happening. I'm waiting for someone to really take advantage of the canvas and make like a web framework that doesn't use HTML at all. That would be really, really neat. Like reproduce something like Flash on the HTML canvas. I think it's just a matter of time before someone does it. Or even in WebGL, which is now supported on a surprising amount of browsers.
Yes, that's very true.
I don't consider myself a front-end developer. I have to be, competent at it. It's not my specialty, but that's moving so fast that I have a hard time keeping up.
Yeah, and there's so much there is so much that's always happening with that side of it. I mean, I kind of feel like the in-between part, like, okay, here's the math, here's the structure, whatever, and then the back end, like moving these databases around. That was really, really cool to see that, because I hadn't experienced that before with Ruby on Rails and just Ruby in general. So that was really neat. That's more I'm going to have to check out, but definitely on the front end, and kind of on the back end and how all that communicates with each other. That's like one of those things. It literally changes. It feels like every second. So, yeah, that is very, 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 very cool.
That is really cool. That was a really cool demo. I very much appreciate that demo, actually.
Yeah, it was like, I can do this now? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I just like learning new things, so it's awesome.
Yeah, I'm not sleeping tonight for sure. I'll be doing this all night.
Yeah.
No, go ahead, Gus.
Oh, no, I'm not. Go. Shoot.
Okay, so we wanted to also do our announcements for this week. Gus, you're up with your announcement.
Sure. Well, next week we've got Richard Campbell from .NET Rocks and the Tablet Show and yada, yada, yada coming on. We're going to just have a nice geek out session talking about lots of technologies, hardware, software, geeky things, maybe some nuclear energy or weaponry or something like that in there, and probably some, some scotch or beer or something to that effect. So that's that. JJ, you?
So JJ and Kevin and our media group that we've formed is going to be at Strange Loop Conference, going to be at Startup Voodoo, and going to be at St. Louis Days of .NET. So that is some huge events that we're going to be a part of and at. Also, sprinkled in there is me going to user groups. I'm hoping to show up for the Ruby, also the WordPress user group and the Unix user group, and there's just a whole bunch of other user groups that I'm hopefully going to be able to get to. I want to go to the next Million Cups Coffee and the next I-10, and we're going to meet with Brad, and we're going to go through T-Rex. So while we're there, we'll tweet it out, and if anybody wants to talk with us or talk more about what we're doing and how we're doing it, hit us up on Twitter. That's usually the best place to get a hold of us there, at STL Tech Talk. Is the best way to do that there, to find me, Kevin, or Gus, or whatever the case may be is. But we're just getting started, and we're just trying to really cover this scene. So we're going to be at all these conferences. We plan on being on Techly here pretty soon, and having them on the show just to talk about Startup Voodoo, which is going to be really a lot of fun. So, Brad, do you have any announcements that you'd like to talk about for this week?
Oh, boy. I had a busy week of meetups last couple weeks, and so tomorrow, if you're interested, there's a really neat meetup in St. Louis called Lambda Lounge, which deals with functional and dynamic languages. I think there's a talk on ECMAScript 6, and maybe a talk on, I think it's Lisp or possibly Clojure. I don't remember. That's a really neat one. No, that's all I got for now.
Awesome. And if you want to play a ping pong match against this guy, you can find him here. I am down. So you're probably gonna take me at chess, but I think I may be able to take you at ping pong, maybe.
I welcome that challenge. You're coming down here and doing that now because I don't take challenges lightly. We're playing.
Okay, I'm there. So when we're there, we're gonna be this light. We're gonna have the Arnold Schwarzenegger thing going on, during that last beer commercial or whatever, where he's like, yeah, dude, I would have totally taken him on. I've been like, slam, done. All right, so again, Brad, thank you so much for being on. We can't thank you enough. Honestly, from the bottom of our hearts for coming on, and your enthusiasm and your general charisma, and how much you know and how well you're able to communicate that with others is a skill in its own. It's in its own right. So take those compliments because we really thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much. This was a pleasure. I enjoyed it. Thank you for enriching the community with wonderful content. I love being able to keep up with what's going on in the world, and have you to thank for that. So thank you.
Awesome.
Well, definitely keep trying. We'll tell you that much.
Yeah, we're gonna try until the pennies are coming out of my. No. So again, thank you, Brad, for being on. Gus, any final thoughts on this episode?
None. Brad, thank you for coming on. I'm glad we did something that wasn't .NET finally, other than an Android thing. I enjoy seeing Ruby on Rails and different open source technologies. Not to mention you were able to talk about Mongo and a few other things. So I thank you because it's some of the stuff that I'd like to see and learn myself a little bit, just so that I know. So thank you.
So again, totally, everybody, kumbaya. To all of our fans, we love and thank you for your support of the show. So from the entire STL Tech Talk crew, good coding, we're out.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.